So remember how last week we were talking about like Bushiroad's projected Q1 for 2022 and how it's supposed to be like super stonks, and we were all looking forward to like the Tuesday stream, right? Their product announcement stream, and thinking like, ooh, what are they gonna announce? Like, what is it gonna be? And to be completely honest with you, I didn't really see anything that would like attest that, right? Like their Q1, you know, set 5 might be a huge banger and Client Collection is probably going to sell super well, but I didn't see anything that would go like bam, like explosion, like go crazy in terms of like super stonks. But you know, maybe there's something that's still left to be unveiled. But the one thing that came up on Wednesday was that they had the Chinese version of the strategy presentation stream. And you know, I don't speak Chinese whatsoever. Like, I know very, very basic words like xie and buyao, I think means like don't want or something, which I learned at a Chinese restaurant. But I still tuned into it just to kind of see what they announced. I was kind of curious to see like, where are we going with this? Like what's so special? Like, why did they have to, like, you know, what are they gonna announce at the Chinese stream, right? And I tuned in. Luckily, Tono Hikaru, you know, Tomani's voice actress, was there to bless everyone. But when I was watching it, surprisingly, they also had separate announcements for the Chinese version, right? Because they basically covered like the normal Vanguard announcements, like the upcoming Japanese releases and the upcoming Vice Japanese releases as well as talking about Rebirth. So I was like, okay, are they just covering that? Like, are they just going to talk about those things? They also announced it's going to be like a Chinese New Year promo for all 3 of their games, and of course this beautiful Megumi Overtrigger is also being distributed for Chinese New Year in China as well, which is definitely very cool. But for me, the thing that they announced towards the end of it was the biggest surprise. They announced a Chinese version of Vanguard. Now, this isn't necessarily something new to the TCG scene either, because it's not the first time that a popular card game gets turned into a Chinese version, right? To give you a recent example, the Pokemon trading card game actually had a Chinese version, and it did quite well, right? Because it was advertised well from what I understood, and also on top of that, it had its own kind of like release format, and therefore the format for the Chinese version of the Pokemon TCG and the Japanese version were actually quite different, and so that obviously attracted players to play in the tournaments for the Chinese version. So now with the announcement of the Chinese version, the interesting thing was that they basically said that there's going to be DBTO1, so the Genesis of the 5 Greats, and then they showed Lyrical Monasterio, which is already a very different release pattern, and so I'm kind of curious like what is going to happen with that, right? And also how fast the release speed will be in order to try and see if they catch up to the Japanese version or not. As we saw, the Korean version of Vanguard actually caught up to the Japanese version pretty quickly, and now it's like going at the same pace as the English version, if not a little bit ahead at times. Or I feel like English and Korean is always like racing ahead to see which one is going to go up ahead each other. And so with this announcement, I wanted to also talk to one of my teammates, Reverse Ace, who you can find on Twitter here, because while he, you know, basically lived in Europe for quite a long time, he did grow up in China, and I wanted to kind of like get his opinion on this as well, as someone that knows how these Chinese versions of card games do. And we basically, when we're talking, we kind of went over quite a few struggles that the game might run into. But from my perspective, I feel like leaping Vanguard into the Chinese market is actually a very smart thing for Bushiroad to do, and that might be why they expect such stonks for Vanguard as well, because suddenly by, you know, we talk about this a lot, right? Turning Vanguard into different regional versions will open up the game to not only the people in that country, but specifically children that don't speak any language outside of that country's main language. Especially in Europe, this is why Pokemon, Yu-Gi-Oh, as well as Magic, and even Dragon Ball do quite well in Europe, is because they have French versions, they have German versions, they have Italian versions, Spanish versions, Portuguese versions. Like, especially Portuguese and Spanish are really smart because it goes beyond just Europe. It also will go into Latin America too. And we always say like, oh, if Vanguard would make more language versions, it's gonna grow even more. And as we see, like the Italian version does quite well, the Thai version does quite well, Korean version is also doing quite well, even though they still mostly play, from what I understand, the Japanese version of the game in Korea too. But by creating this fairly popular game that is played very much so in China, like the Japanese version of Vanguard is quite popular in China, you're also opening up the opportunity for kids or people that, you know, don't have internet access or like aren't interested to memorize effects that then they recognize from just looking at the card art. Because that's right, how people, like for example, I play Fire Emblem Cypher, which is only a Japanese card game, and back when my Japanese wasn't that good, I would have to memorize the effects and just remember them by looking at the card art. And so that's how a lot of people play Japanese card games. But by giving people this domestic version, you obviously open up the market to the entire population, basically, whoever is interested in card games. But the issues we run into, of course, is that one, of course, the Japanese version is quite popular in China, And for a lot of people, it's like the question of why should I play the Chinese version when I can play the Japanese version, which by the time that the Chinese version comes out, chances are the Japanese version will be on BT05, right? It'll be further and further ahead. And so it's begging the question, it's like, what will compel these users, the existing users, to get into the game again with a different language version? Like, will it be the tournaments? Will it be the price? Will it be whatever other attractive factor? I think that's kind of what people are wanting to see. And another thing is also just like, from what I understood, is it's a bit of a question mark on how will they handle the Chinese version in terms of like not just marketing and advertisement, but in terms of game balance, in terms of releases. Like, already seeing set 1 into Lyrical is a little bit odd, because obviously decks like Lorna Roll will completely overpower everything from set 1, because the only reason like why, you know, it was on a similar power level in the Japanese and English versions because Bruce and Nirvana and, you know, all these other decks like Bastion had their support from set 2 to also keep them at an equal footing. So that is already kind of like a point for concern for some people, which is something I'm curious to see how they're going to handle. A lot of people as well, from what my friend told me, is there's this issue of like, will tournaments that normally ran the Japanese TCG tournaments allow Chinese cards? Will they allow mixing? Will they allow people with Chinese decks enter into the Japanese tournaments, or will those be held completely separately? Because, for example, in Italy, from what I understand, they have shops that do tournaments for the Italian version, and they have shops that do tournaments for the English version. And from what I understand, in Korea, they also have tournaments that do the Korean version of the tournaments, and they do the Japanese version, right? So how will the Chinese Vanguard company, like the division, I guess, handle this question as well, especially when you have such a big player base that still plays the Japanese version and qualifies to the WGPs and stuff? So I feel like while there are quite a few question marks and a few potential issues, it's overall really exciting to think about how much this might impact Vanguard's growth in the future. Like, this isn't really the kind of video I normally make, but it's actually quite exciting to me after having seen this, that they are taking such a big leap into like growing into domestic markets, right? Because they saw that the game cannot grow by just being in Japan. That's what they realized with the English version, right? Because they specifically said that Overdress has been doing really well in the English version. And so I think they also see that and they want to expand the game more and more now, right? Because now Overdress will be in English, Korean, Japanese, and now Chinese. And I want to see whether they're going to carry that momentum forward, because I think especially for the Latin American countries, having the game in Spanish or Portuguese would be a huge point for growth, and especially for bringing forward the Vanguard IP to younger generations. Part of the reason why like Yu-Gi-Oh! And Pokemon are so mainstream is because we as kids were exposed to them in our own languages, our own language dubs of the anime and our own language versions of the card or the games. For example, well, actually in Lithuania we played with English, but you know, that's you know, a small Eastern European country, so that's a different matter. Especially for the bigger countries like Germany and France and Brazil, right? That is a entirely different question. So yeah, I just wanted to make this quick discussion video about this recent announcement. I just thought it was kind of interesting how they went and announced it, and that kind of explains maybe what they're expecting for their Q1. Let me know what you guys think in the comments as well. Like, what do you think this means for the franchise in the long term? And again, one thing I really hope is that when we have Worlds again, is that we can have a Worlds where all these different language versions can be combined, right? We can have, you know, a Worlds where people from all kinds of countries qualify to one tournament and we can play with a joint card pool like that. So anyway guys, let me know your thoughts in the comments below. If you liked the video, please do give it a like, and if you like the content, please do subscribe, and make sure to tune into BRO 2021. We have the V Premium weekend coming up tomorrow, so make sure you tune in. I'll be commentating for the EU stage and I'll be playing in the NA tournament, so make sure you come through and watch the streams. Links in the description. Also, interesting thing for the Megami promo, while it is going to be just in China for the first, like, I guess, circulation of it, and it is a Japanese language promo, it sounds like there might gonna be like distributing it overseas, like in other countries outside of China too, so that's pretty exciting. Anyway guys, that's gonna be it for me today. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you guys next time. Bye bye.